In our headlines on this Wednesday afternoon, July 10th, here on the Korean Peninsula. President Yoon Suk-yeol visits the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii to commend its contributions to regional security and stability prior to his attendance at this year's NATO summit in Washington, D.C. And speaking of the NATO summit, marking its 75th anniversary this year, the alliance kicks off its annual event in the U.S. capital city this time around, with its 4 partner nations in the Indo-Pacific, including South Korea, in attendance as North Korea and Russia ramp up their military cooperation. Meanwhile, back on the local front, employment expands by some 96,000 in June on year, extending its relatively slow pace of growth as a number of factors, including the blistering summer heat, affect work opportunities in areas such as construction. We start in Hawaii yet again, where President Yoon Suk-yeol became the first South Korean leader in almost 3 decades to visit the U.S. Defense Command there to boost troop morale. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon, who is part of the traveling press corps, files this report.
I put absolute trust in you. So says President Yoon Suk-yeol to U.S. soldiers of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, the U.S. Geographic Combatant Command responsible for the Korean Peninsula. This came as he visited the command on Tuesday and called it the pillar of the ROK-U.S. alliance in an encouraging speech to its soldiers.
엄중한 국제 정세와 한반도 안보 상황 속에 철통 같은 한미 동맹과 우리의 연합 방위 태세를 확고히 다지기 위한 것입니다.
He also called out North Korea as being reckless, saying that its recent military pact and illegal arms deal with Russia has raised more concerns in the international community. He also emphasized INDOPACOM's role in combating such issues, as it's the largest of 6 U.S. combined combatant commands, covering 52% of the Earth's surface, with the saying, from polar bears to penguins.
공고한 공약과 협력에 토대를 둔 강력한 능력이야말로 규범에 기반한 영내 질서를 굳건하게 수호하는 원동력입니다. 그리고 그 근간에 바로 인태사령부가 있습니다.
It's the first time for a South Korean president to visit the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command here in Honolulu since it changed its name from U.S. Pacific Command back in 2018. And if you count the U.S. Pacific Command as well, it's the first time in 29 years. In the meantime, before his speech to the soldiers, President Yoon Suk-yeol had the chance to meet with Commander Samuel Paparo. After a short greeting, Paparo briefed President Yoon on ongoing regional issues. According to the top office, after listening, Yoon responded with appreciation. In fact, President Yoon also awarded Commander Paparo with the Order of National Security Merit. While the commander only took on his current role last May, he led the United States Pacific Fleet for 3 years before this. This wrapped up Yoon's visit to Hawaii. Up next is the NATO summit in Washington, D.C., where once again, he's set to emphasize growing concerns over the strengthened cooperation between Russia and North Korea in front of NATO member countries and the Indo-Pacific 4 partners, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News, Honolulu.
Indeed, next on the president's agenda in the U.S. is the NATO summit in Washington, D.C., where he'll join his global counterparts in condemning challenges to global peace and security. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
Crossing over from Hawaii to D.C., South Korea is connecting security interests across the Indo-Pacific region and transatlantic countries as a practical contributor to global security. That's according to an expert speaking to Arirang News as President Yoon Suk-yeol heads to discussions with NATO countries in Washington, D.C. after wrapping up his visit to the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. President Yoon's stopover in Hawaii demonstrates his host's firm alliance with Washington and a pivotal moment in its commitment to freedom, peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. Seoul's assertive posture matters as European states look to work more closely with Indo-Pacific countries given their overlapping interests in countering coercive forces in international waters and the growing collaboration between Russia and North Korea. Seoul's presidential office says NATO and its 4 Indo-Pacific partners, including South Korea, Japan, Australia and New Zealand, will issue various statements criticizing the Moscow-Pyongyang axis.
The significance of South Korea's participation in NATO summit is that it is a reflection of how security issues in European theater and Indo-Pacific region are closely interlinked. Russia could continue sustain its war efforts in Ukraine because China is supporting Russia's economy. China is basically funding Russia's war efforts. So Europeans, they want to dissuade China from doing that. But now North Korea is providing ammunition to support Russia. So there is a closer link between security issues in the two theaters, and South Korea is in a critical position to manage the security efforts linking between the like-minded countries.
Since last year's NATO summit in Vilnius, South Korea and the 32-member bloc have been focusing on institutionalizing cooperation on battlefield information, military intelligence sharing and cybersecurity. Based on solidarity with like-minded countries, President Yoon's office said South Korea would seek to expand its realm of security cooperation to economic and technological partnerships.
South Korea's military industry has been advancing at the global level, so there is a opportunity that South Korea can provide support other countries' weapon system, their defense equipment capacity. So that's one thing, defense industry leading, supporting other countries' defense capacity.
While in DC, Yoon will hold a marathon of bilateral summits with at least 10 countries, including Finland, Sweden, Norway, Germany and the UK, with conversations expected to cover defense industry cooperation, infrastructure, supply chains, nuclear energy and other significant security interests. Yoon and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida are also expected to meet in their second summit of this year, deepening their growing partnership against regional security threats as part of their trilateral cooperation with the United States. Oh Seong, Arirang News, Honolulu.
And this year's NATO gathering opened doors on Tuesday in Washington, D.C., with Ukraine looking to dominate the main discussion among leaders this year as well. Our Lee Sing-jae has more.
With Russia's deadly airstrike on a children's hospital in Kyiv on Monday still fresh in their minds, U.S. President Joe Biden welcomed members of the largest military alliance in the world to the U.S. Capitol. The 3-day NATO summit that started on Tuesday is all the more significant as the military alliance celebrates its 75th anniversary this year. Kicking off the summit was a roundtable discussion on women, peace, and security. Later in the afternoon, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg made a speech along with President Biden, who looked back on NATO's history and the current role of the military alliance. However, the prolonged war in Ukraine is expected to be the main agenda item at this year's summit, as Ukraine looks to regain momentum for support. The U.S. has passed 5 different bills since the start of the Ukraine war, pledging $175 billion, including most recently in April, over $61 billion. NATO member countries have also pledged to maintain annual military support of around $43 billion. However, with former U.S. President Donald Trump's chances of returning to the Oval Office on the rise, it leaves some question marks over whether the U.S. contribution will continue after January 2025. At the same time, the summit itself may be the final test for President Biden's capability as not just a U.S. leader, but also a world leader who has been at the forefront of several global conflicts during his 4 years, as the November presidential election is mere months away. Meanwhile, President Yoon Suk-yeol is expected to hold 10 bilateral summits on the sidelines of the NATO summit, including a 4-way meeting with 3 other Indo-Pacific nations. Yoon will express concerns over deepening ties between North Korea and Russia, while looking to cooperate with NATO members and Indo-Pacific partners in the ongoing war in Ukraine. Lee Sing-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea has won an arms deal worth more than $930 million from Romania. According to authorities here, the deal will see Hanwha Aerospace shipping 54 K9 howitzers and 36 K10 ammunition resupply vehicles to Romania. This latest deal makes Romania the 9th country in the world to acquire K9 howitzers. Now, last year, Romania also agreed to purchase South Korea's Shingung surface-to-air missiles. Torrential rain in Korea's southern regions prompted mass evacuations amid fears of flash floods and landslides. Our Peunji has details.
More than 2,000 residents in the Chungcheongdo and Jeollado provinces have been forced to evacuate as heavy rain poured down overnight. In Kunsan City in Jeollabuk-do province, heavy rain poured down at a rate of more than 130 millimeters per hour. This is the highest amount of rainfall recorded in the Kunsan area since weather observations began. Over in Secheon-gun County, located in Chungcheongnam-do province, over 110 millimeters per hour were recorded in the early hours of Wednesday morning. Houses and cars were flooded, and the Chungcheongnam-do Fire Service headquarters said it received more than 800 reports of damage related to flooding in a period of just 5 hours. In response, President Yoon Suk-yeol called for measures to prevent further damage. President Yoon, who's currently on a trip to Hawaii, issued an emergency order after being briefed on what was happening at home. He also ordered officials to evacuate residents in areas that are at risk of landslides and restrict access to areas prone to flooding. As of 2:30 a.m. on Wednesday, the South Korean government announced that the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters alert level has been raised from level 1 to level 2. And the heavy rain crisis alert level has also been raised from caution to warning. The highest is level 3, and the heavy rain crisis alert levels are divided into 4 stages: attention, caution, warning, and severe. This comes as South Korea braces for another round of monsoon rain, set to hit most regions of the country until late Wednesday. Peunji, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Korea's labor market maintained its growth in June, albeit at a tangibly slower pace amid a number of factors, including the sweltering heat. Our Moon Hye-ryun explains.
South Korea's job market continued its slowdown in June, with the construction sector seeing a decline in employment numbers. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Tuesday, there were 28.9 million people in employment last month, up 96,000 compared to the same month last year. But it's the second month in a row that job growth has hovered below the 100,000 mark, dropping in May after posting an increase of more than 260,000 in April. Despite a slowdown, though, the number of those in employment has posted record highs for 29 months straight.
By industry, the healthcare, telecommunications, and warehousing industries led the job growth. And by job type, temporary and full-time jobs showed an increase. By age, the number of those employed in their 30s and older than 60s rose.
With the country's aging population, the number of people in employment aged over 60 has continued to increase, showing an upswing of just under 260,000. However, the number of employed people aged between 15 and 29 years old fell by nearly 150,000 year-on-year in June. Employment in the construction industry fell by 66,000, showing a decline for 2 months straight, while employment in the retail industry has dipped for 4 consecutive months as it becomes increasingly automated. During an economic meeting on the same day, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok commented that there have been several factors contributing to the deceleration of job growth.
Temporary factors such as the heatwave have restricted employment, and difficulties with the declining job market in the construction industry and the self-employment sector continue.
In a response to these latest figures, the government pledged to redouble efforts in boosting domestic demand and exports, which will lead to a rise in employment, and prepare personalized job support for construction workers. Furthermore, it plans to check employment conditions across each industry and class weekly in order to devise countermeasures for any issues that are detected. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
In other news, battery demand is growing, and so is the need for better solutions to allow for its sustainable adoption along the value chain. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin covers the government's efforts to this end.
The South Korean government is accelerating efforts to be more economically sustainable by implementing measures to increase EV batteries that can be reused. During an economic ministerial meeting held on Wednesday, the government announced that it will make performance testing mandatory for batteries before removal, starting in 2027.
The government will establish an institutional framework to utilize used batteries from electric vehicles at the end of their life cycle as a resource rather than waste.
Performance testing for batteries is currently required only after they are removed, but the government is aiming to expand the scope of batteries that can be repurposed and reused under the new regulation. With this change, EV owners will now have more options if they choose to replace old batteries with repurposed batteries instead of brand new batteries. And they will also be able to be compensated for their batteries based on a more accurate and detailed battery assessment. This comes as the Ministry of Environment projects that there will be more than 100,000 waste batteries each year starting in 2030 with the growing number of registered EV vehicles. Global society has also already moved towards implementing measures that will increase the amount of batteries that can be repurposed, reused, and recycled. Under the European Union battery regulation adopted in 2023, consumers will be able to remove and replace batteries in their electronic products at any time of the life cycle starting 2027. And from 2025 onwards, certain levels of valuable raw materials in batteries, such as cobalt, lithium, and nickel, are also required to be recovered. And changes to regulation in other sectors were also announced during the meeting, including plans to designate another area in addition to COEX and Gwanghwamun Square as an outdoor advertising zone sometime in 2026. That's part of the goal to create a South Korean version of New York City's Times Square in Seoul. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, over in Los Angeles, the Grammy Museum has announced the launch of its first full-floor K-pop exhibition in partnership with HYBE. Now scheduled to run from August 2nd to September 15th, the showcase titled HYBE, We Believe in Music, will be one of the largest exhibitions the museum has ever curated as part of efforts to explore the engine driving the K-pop industry. The exhibition will have on display artifacts of 78 K-pop stars, as well as host interactive experiences such as a random dance play, where attendees can sing and dance to music from HYBE acts. We are now counting down a little over a fortnight to the Summer Olympics in Paris, and Team Korea back on Tuesday held its official launching ceremony. Our Cho Soo-young covers the event.
The time for the athletes' hard work to shine is slightly over 2 weeks away. Team Korea gathered on Tuesday for an inaugural ceremony for the 2024 Summer Olympics in Paris. The ceremony marks the official launching of the national team, and the former weightlifting star of the Beijing Olympics and now the Vice Minister of Culture, Sports and Tourism, Chang Mi-ran, encouraged all the athletes.
I know how much effort the athletes have put in to get to this point, and I believe that all those hard training hours will lead to great results in this Olympics. I hope all our athletes stay strong.
Prime Minister Han Duck-soo also participated in the ceremony for support.
This Olympics of great significance because the first where athletes and spectators come together since the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. Your time is approaching. The whole nation will fervently support all the athletes. The government will also provide full support. To all the athletes, I wish you the best of success.
The more than pentathlon athletes who recently achieved excellent results at the World Championships in China also pledged to do their best to bring pride to the nation.
Of course we aim for the gold medal. We are sweating and training hard to achieve that goal. I hope that all the effort we have put in will bring good results in the upcoming Paris Olympics.
Yoon Hyun-ji, a judoka competing in her second Olympics, pledged to trust herself and bring joy to the nation.
This is my second Olympics. During the Tokyo Olympics back then, I only focused on preparing to win a medal. However, this time around, regardless of the outcome, I focus on my training without thinking about medal colors. All I can say is that I will do my best.
In the upcoming 2024 Paris Olympics this summer, around 10,500 athletes from 206 countries will compete in 32 sports. Team Korea will comprise 144 athletes to participate in 22 sports, aiming to secure a place in the top 15 overall rankings. Cheon, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. The search resumed in Indonesia on Tuesday for 35 people still missing after landslides at an illegal gold mine on the island of Sulawesi, which killed at least 23. Authorities said that they deployed a helicopter and hundreds of rescuers after torrential rain on Sunday triggered landslides that engulfed miners and residents in the Gorontalo province, over 2,000 kilometers east of the country's capital, Jakarta. The military and police were also involved in Tuesday's rescue effort, among 400 personnel involved. Authorities said that 66 survivors have been pulled out of the debris, but thick mud has been hindering rescue efforts. Indonesia's disaster agency also warned of potential risks from further rain. One of Hollywood's most iconic companies, Paramount Global, has agreed to merge with independent film studio Skydance Media. Paramount's controlling shareholder, Shari Redstone, agreed to sell her stake to David Ellison's Skydance for $8 billion. Under the agreement, Skydance will invest back some $8 billion in merging their TV and movie production studio with Paramount, while additionally acquiring the Redstone family's National Amusements, which holds 77% of Paramount's voting shares, for $2.4 billion. While Paramount shares have fallen by more than 75% in the last 5 years, the studio created many hit films such as The Godfather series, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Star Trek, and the Mission Impossible franchise. The European Space Agency's Ariane 6 rocket launched successfully on Tuesday on its maiden flight after a delay of 4 years. Coming a year after the retirement of the predecessor Ariane 5, Europe's newest unmanned rocket, weighing 540 tons and standing 56 meters tall, blasted off from the launch pad in Kourou, French Guiana. Ariane 6, which cost some $4.3 billion, began development in 2014 by the Ariane Group, a joint venture between Airbus and Safran, after the European Space Agency nations agreed on the need to respond to growing competition in the commercial launch market. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Jeollabuk-do province saw more than 150 millimeters of rain overnight, and rain clouds have moved towards the east to Gyeongsang-do province and do expect to see heavy rain throughout the day today. Meanwhile, rain has died down for the rest of the country and rain alerts have been lifted. However, a landslide alert remains in place. Remember, landslides can happen suddenly and without warning, so please stay on high alert and be safe today for those in Jeollado and Gyeongsang-do provinces. Meanwhile, afternoon temperatures should be 4 to 5 degrees higher this afternoon. Seoul and Daegu seeing a high of 31 degrees Celsius this afternoon. The capital area started out under sunny skies, but rain should return in the afternoon. Jeju and the south coast will be quite windy all day today. After a short break today, monsoon rain continues in certain parts of Korea through early next week, while central regions will get spotty rain. With that in mind, let's take a look at the international weather conditions.
That ends our Wednesday afternoon newscast. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Do stay with us.